to a country that's perhaps the most meddled with in the region, a microcosm of geopolitical competition for decades, where else but Lebanon, where there are calls for a modern-day revolution. Hundreds of thousands of people from all walks of life, young, old, Christian, Muslim, coming together with one message: end government corruption. The country has been at a standstill for days now, with many businesses and schools forced to close, and an emergency economic plan approved by the cabinet Monday has done nothing to ease public anger. In places where protests turned into partying, residents gathered the next morning to clean the streets together. Lebanese blogger Gina Rady, one of the leading voices of these protests, joining me now from Beirut. And so the government responding to these demonstrations, these protests, with a raft of proposals. Do they get it? Are they on message? Are they listening at this point?
As you said, no one thinks they get it, and I think the tone deafness of their 13 points was amazing. And perhaps I think the worst thing about that day is while they drafted those 13 points of non-action, it's all reduce, try to, etc., is that they passed an extension of a committee that should run our oil and gas sector, which expired 11 months ago. So they just added salaries for people who weren't elected to get paid to not do a real job. So no one bought it. And if the protests were waning down, people are back again just because of these 13 amendments or decisions.
Are you surprised by just how many people and the type of people who have come out, or did you see this coming?
I think we've been warning about this happening for many years now, but personally, and a lot of my friends who've shared this street with me and this square with me, we never thought we'd see this day in our lives. So you have people flying in from around the world, from the Lebanese diaspora, to be part of this. So we are all surprised, including the authorities, where we have 5 days of radio silence from all of them. Even stations that are owned by their parties are putting on cooking shows or reruns of old shows instead of showing what's happening here. So a lot of it has been online, especially new media like Instagram and others, which are the tools that we are using to spread the news horizontally instead of vertically anymore.
And that's fascinating, the suggestion that the use of social media has allowed you to kind of own this rather than it be these sort of top-down political messages. Protesters, it seems, are determined to stay on the streets despite the economic reform plan that you and I have just been discussing, approved by the cabinet Monday. Let's just have a listen to what a couple of people told us.
I am here, staying in the streets, demanding my rights and the rights of that exhausted soldier. Soldiers who are paying taxes like me and who are suffering like me. I am staying on the streets for my children and for his children, to find a country to live in and not have to emigrate and leave my country.
So what does happen next?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
What happens next?
It's pretty loud, other. This is the question on everyone's mind right now, and I think in previous grassroots movements that tried to start, like in 2015 with the garbage crisis, the fear of vacuum is what government forces usually try to make people scared of and not go down. But if you look at the average age of most protesters here, they're all post-Civil War generations, so the vacuum to them is part of their life. Most of my life, we didn't have a president because they couldn't agree who he should be. Most of my life, the cabinets were resigned and life went on as normal. So we're not afraid of vacuum anymore. And honestly, if you just, everyone's concerns are different and everyone agrees on one thing, that enough is enough and that anything is better than the current situation we're in. And maybe a lot of people thought, oh, it's about a WhatsApp text for the voice over IP charge that they wanted. But for me, it's a lot more than that, because this isn't like a stab in the heart of the people. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts. So the insults and humiliation and the lack of gas, and you can't withdraw from an ATM, and no bread anymore, and then armed escorts of ministers pulling their guns on unarmed protesters was the final straw that broke the camel's back. And you can see that change in the rhetoric of people where they were afraid to talk about their leaders. Now they're going out on their streets and their areas speaking about it. If this would happen maybe 1 year ago, they would be forced to apologize and go back on TV and say, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say what I said about parties like Amal, Hezbollah, the Free Patriotic Movement, and others.
And finally, and to that point, should the Prime Minister now resign? Certainly there have been multiple calls on the street for that. Should Hariri step down?
He definitely should resign, and I think it won't be enough for the people if only he resigns, because in Lebanon the cabinet of ministers is just a reflection of the parliament and the politicians who all agree on dividing up the slices of the pie usually, and people know that anymore. And like we said before, we're using social media, but so are they, and people's awareness about what's fake news or a fake WhatsApp broadcast is becoming stronger. So now, like, removing a figurehead, which is the government, while everything else stays in place, won't work. And you can see the chant is الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام, which means the system, not just the cabinet, because everyone knows that the cabinet is just the errand boy for the political establishment that has been in Lebanon since the civil war and never really went away. And people, some of the chants we were hearing is like, today the civil war ends, when everyone came together finally, when most of the time it's been divided since the civil war that just stopped magically and everyone pretended like nothing happened.
Sure. Gino, it's great to have you on. Stay in touch with us. Gino Reddy out of the Beirut Bureau for you.